from hosting his own podcast, Tri-State Hockey Daily Face-Off. Arthur Staple, thanks for coming on the show today.
Good to see you, boys. How's everyone doing?
Fantastic.
Living the dream, Arthur. Living the dream.
What we like to hear.
Ready for some playoff hockey. Well, we'll start you off with this.
Yes,
The President's Trophy winners. For the fourth time in the club's history, the Colorado Avalanche are taking it home, massing 117 points with 2 games to go. As we know, the last President's Trophy team to win the Stanley Cup was the 2012-2013 Blackhawks. So will this be the team to break the streak?
It's a good question. The first half of the season, really, I think they lost maybe 4 or 5 times in regulation. They were on a real roll, and even in that division in the Central with Dallas and Minnesota, who are really 2 of the other maybe half a dozen teams you'd think were legitimate cup contenders as we went through this season. You had to say they were the team to beat. Still saying that they're the team to beat, even though they've cooled off a little bit. I think that's actually a good thing. You can't sustain a crazy pace. I feel like we saw it with the Bruins a few years ago, where they set the regular season record with whatever it was, 135 points, went out in the first round of Florida. You got to be able to take your foot off the gas at some point during a season. And I feel like that long Olympic break, even though they had a lot of Olympians, they were able to kind of reset a little bit. That I think their goaltending situation is a little bit funky. Mackenzie Blackwood is kind of the nominal number one, but Scott Wedgwood, who's a veteran backup, has really outplayed him for a lot of the year. So I'm curious to see what their goalie decisions are going to look like when we get into the playoffs. But you also look at kind of the bottom of that Western Conference. You've got LA kind of sitting in that bottom seed now as a potential matchup with them, with only 89 points. And I think it's 22 regulation wins in 81 games. You're not sensing a lot of threats from a lot of the other teams in the West. That Dallas Minnesota winner is going to be a tough out in the second round, but I feel like if Colorado gets past that, they're really the team to beat. Kind of clear head and shoulders above. So they faltered the last couple seasons in the playoffs, and obviously they won the cup, whatever it was, 4 years ago now. Right. But Cale Makar is healthy. Nathan McKinnon's healthy. I feel like, they added Nazem Kadri back, who was on their cup winning team. They traded back for him from Calgary. He's, and now he's kind of a depth piece. They just seem to have a lot of good pieces in a lot of spots right now. And I think the fact that they're not coming off a cup win, they're not necessarily coasting. I think they understand that this is the time of year, that core has been together long enough. They know that they need to ramp it up this time of year, play better than they played the last few springs. So, I don't know if I'd put them as the odds-on favorite, but pretty darn close to it.
Yeah, they definitely got to stay hungry. My dark horse is the Wild. I think Minnesota is a really good team, and they just seem to be that spice, that hungry, that good combination of grit and just tough play. So it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. Last year's runner-up, the Edmonton Oilers, are wounded going into the playoffs. Leon Draisaitl has been out with a lower body injury since March. The Oilers are optimistic he can return, but it's unlikely for the first round. They still have Connor McDavid, though. So how far can the Oilers go without Draisaitl?
I mean, Connor McDavid, we've seen him do it even in the finals a couple of years ago when he won the Conn Smythe Trophy in a losing effort. This guy can make a lot of things happen just by the force of his talent. I feel like they're not in as good a position as they've been the last couple of years going in that Pacific Division. I think it was McDavid himself. What did he call it? A pillow fight a couple of weeks ago to see who's going to win it.
Right.
It's about the smartest, most accurate thing I've heard about that division. You see what Vegas has done with John Tortorella coming in. They've kind of nosed ahead, and we'll see these next couple of days who shakes out where. But if Edmonton plays Anaheim, that's kind of an interesting matchup to me. They've played LA so often. I think it's 4 straight years in the playoffs in the first round. A team that they know well. If they don't get LA this time, Anaheim's kind of a wild card. They haven't been in the playoffs a long time. A lot of veteran guys they brought in.
A couple of former Rangers over there.
Former Rangers.
Rangers West, Arthur.
That's
Rangers
right.
West.
That Ducks team has a lot of youth and a lot of speed, and I feel like they match up well with Edmonton. And really, as always, the question mark for the Oilers is in goal. They gave up on Stuart Skinner, made the move to trade him to Pittsburgh for Tristan Jarry, kind of a 1-for-1 spot, and Jarry's been arguably worse than Skinner has ever been in the Edmonton net.
Oh, yeah.
So now it kind of falls to Connor Ingram, who's been putting his career back together after, you know, going into the assistance program for anxiety last, you know, a couple of years ago. He had a decent run in Phoenix and then kind of flamed out of the league, signed an AHL contract, turned it into an NHL contract, and now he's the guy in net. So he can get hot. He's got a decent track record, but I still feel like the Oilers just look a lot shakier than they've looked. And obviously missing Draisaitl, you know, McDavid can do a lot, but he can do a lot more when Draisaitl's out there with him, especially on that potent power play. Evan Bouchard, you know, these are guys that are certainly playoff tested, but it's also a lot of hockey that they've played in the last 2 years with nothing to show for it. So you wonder if they can ramp it back up a third time, knowing that they're, like you said, they're wounded, knowing that maybe they're not as solid as they were in net, even when with Stuart Skinner, who had a lot of question marks. So, you know, I think McDavid puts a lot on his shoulders, and he usually comes through. If he doesn't come through this time, whether it's against Anaheim or maybe against Vegas in the second round, it wouldn't totally surprise me to see them bow out early, maybe do maybe a little bit more than just kind of their usual minor changes here and there. I wonder about Chris Knobloch, their coach, whether he'll last in a next season. And I wonder if they start to understand now that it's time to clean the slate defensively and in net and make some more drastic changes than they've made.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I don't see it. I don't see how the team got better from last year, and it's almost like they're due to trip up. Like I can't see them going to the finals. I can't see them winning the finals, and I could totally see them getting ousted in the first round in a 7-game series. You know, it goes the distance, but they just come up short. Maybe it's just one goal, you know, every game. It's just they always lose by a goal, or, you know, in the last second. It just seems destined to happen. It's just I don't know how he gets over this hump. I don't know what he has to do. I mean, Draisaitl's been his, you know, teammate and kind of like his partner in crime this whole time, and they just can't get it done. And it's sad because you want to see the best players play together and you want to see them go far into the playoffs, but this might be their last shot here together.
Yeah.
You hate to think that they wasted all of this opportunity because they wouldn't move on fast enough from Stuart Skinner.
Right.
I mean, I feel like Skinner actually was pretty good, all things considered, the last 2 playoff runs. But I also just kind of feel like, and you see it with Florida, obviously injuries are one thing, but, you know, 100 games a year takes a toll on a lot of guys. And it's not just the physical toll, it's the mental toll. And especially when you've gone that far 2 years in a row and not come away with any hardware, the mental strain, I feel, you know, it makes me think of like the Buffalo Bills from the 90s. Like you get that close that many times in a row, it's hard to ramp it back up next time around because you know what the disappointment feels like. It's probably the most hollow feeling you can have, and to do it twice in a row to the same team, and now this third time in a row, you're kind of like, oh, we're not even where we used to be.
Right.
And we played 200 plus games the last 2 years, last 2 plus years. It's a hard one to get over, and I feel like maybe a team in that situation needs to take a step back and make some real changes before they take another step forward.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. In recent weeks, there have been some high-profile coaching changes. Old friend Torts is back in the saddle, manning the bench in Vegas, 6-0-1 since he's taken over for Bruce Cassidy. More recently, the Islanders ousted Patrick Waugh and replaced him with Peter DeBoer. What insight can you give us regarding these moves, and who will have a bigger impact this season and beyond?
You know, it's something that's pretty rare, and obviously Lou Lamoriello has been the Islanders GM for the last little while, but up until this season, and he's the guy that kind of pioneered that last couple weeks of the season firing. It worked to perfection in the year 2000 when he fired Robbie Ftorek with the Devils, and Larry Robinson came in and took over, and they won the Stanley Cup. He tried it again about 6-7 years later with Claude Julien. Didn't work. But I feel like, you know, we're at a point now in the NHL where at any given time, 2 or 3 legit Hall of Fame coaches are available. You know, you can argue Hall of Fame credentials for coaches in the NHL, but you've got guys like John Tortorella, Peter DeBoer, Peter Laviolette, even now Bruce Cassidy is out of job. These are guys in the top 20 in coaching wins, in coaching in games coached in the history of the NHL. You saw it when Joel Quenneville came back with Anaheim. You know, these are guys that are not just difference makers behind the bench, they're turnaround artists. You've got DeBoer,
Mhm.
comes into an Islander team. Obviously, they're not going to make the playoffs. He only had a week and a half to try to turn around a pretty huge slide. But even going into next season, his first full year, his last 4 jobs. First year in San Jose, he goes to first year in New Jersey, he goes to a Stanley Cup final. First year in San Jose, goes to a Stanley Cup final. First year in Dallas and Vegas, conference final. This is a guy who comes in and changes a lot and gets guys to buy in. Peter Laviolette, same way, So it's
So why do you think the Islanders waited so long? I mean, they probably were thinking about this, right?
I don't think this was a move to save this season.
Okay.
Matthew Darche is in his first year as general manager, and he said a lot of the time from the beginning, when he took the job all the way through the season, he's still figuring out what this team is all about. The vibes were so high with them with what Matthew Schaefer was able to do at the beginning of the year. Ilya Sorokin was playing like a surefire Vezina Trophy winner for most of the year. And they started the slide really started after the Olympic break where they weren't defending very well and they weren't scoring enough timely goals and the goaltending wasn't as good as it had been. But I think he was willing to give Patrick Roy more of a chance to right the ship because of what had gone on the first 50, 60 games. And I don't think, I genuinely believe that Matthew Darche was thinking, let me evaluate here the whole year. We get in the playoffs. If we win a round, we win 2 rounds, then we'll figure it all out. But I think as the slide continued and you saw what other teams were doing, Toronto already fired their GM. So maybe Craig Berube's out there. Nashville, maybe Andrew Brunette will be out there. New Jersey's now in the mix for a new GM and possibly Sheldon Keefe being out there. Once the season ends, 2 or 3 other teams might be changing their coaches if they don't make the playoffs. So, 2 things. Patrick Roy, maybe not your guy, still trying to figure it out, but not for sure. And Peter DeBoer is going to have a long list of calls the minute the season ends, maybe even before. So if that's the guy you want for next season and beyond, and you've convinced you're finally convinced that Patrick Roy is not the guy, you got to be aggressive now. And that's an aspect of the NHL that I feel like is mirroring some other sports, mostly the NFL, where NFL you tend to wait till Black Monday, but that people have been in contact with coaches and executives before then. You have to lay that groundwork. And I think in the NHL, with the season going on in so many games, it's harder to do that. But I do believe Matthew Darche when he says after they lost in Carolina a week ago Saturday, he put in the call to Peter DeBoer. And I'm not saying that there hasn't been any third parties hadn't reached out to each other to sort of gauge interest to that point. But Saturday night, he reaches out, and Sunday morning, it's done. He's the new coach. So you got to act fast, especially when you've got quality coaches out there. And I think Vegas doing it the week before kind of opened the door to teams saying like, hey, why not? If we're going to eat this money, there's 2 years left for Patrick Roy. He's paying Peter DeBoer upward, a little more than $5 million a year. He's already the 3rd highest paid coach. So ownership has to sign off on spending that kind of money on paying 2 coaches. But I think this is part of their plan going forward. There's a new GM, there's a new coach now, and I think this coming off season for the Islanders, especially without playoffs, they got some stuff to figure out because they certainly have picked the best coach that they could pick.
You think that Peter was their guy? It wasn't like they were interested in Torts and then Torts got taken?
No, Torts is a different beast. Kelly McCrimmon and George McPhee out there in Vegas, they are big on, I think they felt like we have a Stanley Cup contending team and we're just not playing like it. We need a guy who's going to kick us in the pants a little bit. And Torts can coach. I've known John for 20 plus years and he kind of emphasizes that aspect, but he is an X's and O's guy. He knows what to do behind the bench. There's a reason that Mike Sullivan made sure to have him behind the bench over in Milan for that gold medal winning US team. He isn't just a motivator or a guy who says funny things or just speaks off the cuff the way that he does. He knows what he's doing behind a bench. So I think there is that aspect of it, but there is definitely the aspect of if you're a guy on Vegas and Torts comes in, you're sitting up a little bit straighter. You're saying, oh, okay, they mean business now. Bruce Cassidy is a great coach. He coached him to a Stanley Cup. But I think Torts is a guy who can get everybody's attention, especially in this short window, especially a team that I think management feels and ownership feels out there should be contending for a cup every year. So I'm curious to see how they'll do in the playoffs. Like we were talking about with Edmonton, the path in the Pacific is pretty wide open. If Torts gives you those extra points to get first place, to get home ice all the way through until they get to the conference final, then it's definitely worth doing. And kind of, Torts isn't signed beyond this year. I think they're going to kind of wait and see how he feels and how the situation looks once their season is officially over. But an interesting choice, and I think a little different situation than the Islanders had.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you're looking at a team that's already established, and you're bringing in an established guy who's going to work with the veterans. He's going to make that happen. The Islanders, you're looking at a youth movement. You're looking at, with especially with their young superstar in Schaefer. Torts isn't really great for the young kids sometimes. We'll be polite and we'll say that. But since we're talking about Torts, we are a New York sports show, and there's one team we have to highlight above the rest. The one that actually made the playoffs, the Buffalo Sabres. The longest playoff drought in sports has officially been passed to the New York Jets. So what has been the secret to their success this season compared to seasons past?
I think it's weird to say, because firing a GM in the middle of the season for a team, as early as they fired Kevin Adams and replaced him with Jarmo Kekalainen, who they'd brought in kind of as an assistant GM advisor prior to the season. Mm-hmm. I think doing that it made everybody in that room who'd been so used to the losing and kind of not enough changing. I think it made them wake up and say, maybe ownership does care, because Kevin Adams was hired under very kind of odd circumstances, a guy who played in the league, played for the Sabres, but was involved in their youth organization, had no real NHL coaching or management experience. And Terry Pegula, the owner there, owners do what they do. And he decided that someone that he knew well, even though it wasn't someone who was experienced in managing an NHL team, brought him on. And I think they never really, the players there were kind of like, what are we doing here? Like, are we an NHL team, or are we kind of a pet project for our owner? And that just kind of infused the room, whether, the losing seasons, good starts that got stopped, and even bringing back Lindy Ruff to coach there, who's, a guy who had the most success behind the bench Buffalo history. But that was, that's 15 years ago, 16 years ago now. I think maybe the players didn't think that the ownership took them seriously. And I think that move, bringing in a guy like Jarmo, who is, his track record in Columbus is certainly mixed, but he is a hockey guy. He knows the landscape. He knows the league. He knows just what to say. So I think that kind of made them take notice. And it's a good team. It's always been a team that's got some decent young talent. They obviously needed better goaltending, which they've gotten this year. Alex Lyon, who's kind of been, I give that guy a lot of credit now in his 30s, where he's kind of been a goalie version of one of these coaches we were talking about. He's come into Detroit and kind of helped there. In Florida, he kind of helped stabilize things a couple of years ago as Bobrovsky's backup when they started to really turn things around in Florida. So, I think the pieces have fallen into place, and really just kind of, I think from what I understand, talking to people around the team, I think Lindy, who's a pretty hands-on coach, another guy who's one of these top 5 all-time in wins and games coached, I think he just kind of said, okay, it's your group, it's your room, do what you need to do to succeed, because things just weren't working at that time, kind of midway through the year. And the players have really just run with it. You see kind of a lot of guys, Rasmus Dahlin is an all-world player who's their captain. I think he's always been really good. And you kind of waited for him to kind of follow that Jack Eichel path of getting fed up with being all the losing in Buffalo and ask out at some point. But it's great to see that kind of under his watch, young guys like Peyton Krebs, Alex Tuch is having a good year and a walk year. And we're kind of, the big question was, would he get traded? Now it's like, doesn't he want to stay? The team's good again. So they have a lot to like there. And it's one of the great fan bases in the NHL, a really, really loyal group that's been tested a lot. I've covered a lot of Islanders games over the year, and it's a smaller group, but it's very similar, where, the Buffalo ownership and management and the team itself has really tried their hardest to turn away some of those hardcore fans in Buffalo, and they won't go. And now they're being rewarded. So it is a nice thing to see. And really, the East is pretty wide open. They've won the division, so they're going to it seems like they're going to get Boston in the first round based on what's happening tonight with the Bruins. That's kind of a nice storied old rivalry back to like the Ray Bourque days. So it's fun to see that be rekindled. And, if Buffalo gets past that, you've got Tampa or Montreal. It's a nice revival, and it's a good year for it too, because I think it's as wide open as it's ever been.
Oh yeah, this is a completely wide open situation. I mean, if you think about it, like, how many of those Western Conference teams wouldn't have sniffed an Eastern Conference
I know.
playoff
I
spot?
know.
Like, it's the East is officially the beast, and it's good on Buffalo, but it makes you wonder, what if they kept Jack Eichel and they actually got him to like believe a little bit? Like they might have been able to turn this around a little bit faster. But we've been talking about the playoffs and playoff adjacent teams, but we have to talk about the Rangers. Oh, this embarrassing centennial season from the New York Rangers. Despite decent goaltending from Igor and Jonathan Quick, who recently announced his retirement, best of luck in retirement, Quickie. The defense was atrocious. The offense wasn't that much better, but, especially once they traded Panarin to the Kings. But they were near the top of the league in hits. So there's that. So what can the Rangers do to turn this ship around in Mike Sullivan's second season?
I just think some stability with the lineup. And, it feels like in the last, probably since the trade deadline, that I think maybe players have started to exhale a little bit from the last year plus, starting kind of the summer before the 24-25 season when Barclay Goodrow goes on waivers, kind of the public standoff with Jacob Trouba that ends with him being traded a few months later. These really jolted the room because those are two guys that were leaders. It was a team of talented veterans, but not a ton of vocal leaders. So you take those two guys out of the mix, you shake things up. There was the kind of the group chat to the GMs back in November of 24. Chris Drury offered up Trouba and Chris Kreider. I think that kind of knocked Chris Kreider for a loop a bit. So that 24-25 season was really just kind of marked with a lot of chaos and really self-inflicted chaos. It wasn't like somebody, players got hurt or there was any sort of animating incident or a surprise trade. It was the GM saying, I want to change this group, and kind of elbowing his way through the room to kind of shake things up. And that the result was not, they didn't band together. They kind of fell apart. And even at that team had 85 points. This team is nowhere even close to that record-wise. And I really think this season, JT Miller is named captain. He gets hurt, kind of a soft tissue injury right on the eve of the season, tries to play through it for what seemed like the first 2 or 3 months and was just completely ineffective. And I'm sure being a first-time captain, the weight of that being on his shoulders was really difficult to deal with. Vincent Trocheck gets hurt. Second week of the season, he's out for a month. A guy who's a real glue guy in that room and who's kind of carrying the message through a couple of different coaches and can kind of be a real adaptable player. Artemi Panarin, they had very brief contract talks before the season started. The offer was, I think Panarin himself made it very clear that they didn't want him. So he's got that weighing on his head, and his teammates know that he's probably headed out the door if they're not playing well. So there's just a lot of factors. And then they couldn't score a goal. Mike Sullivan really, I think the message of defense first and being a little bit tougher to play in front of their own net, in front of Igor Shesterkin, really got through, but they couldn't score those first few games. And all of a sudden you're like, well, this is nonsense. Like we're not going to play this way. We're going to try to open it up because we can't score. And then all of a sudden you see kind of that way too wide open style that the Rangers have played that Shesterkin is covered for in their good seasons, but has not been able to cover for in their bad ones. So a lot of factors, I think, at play to start this season. They trade Panarin in kind of this slow motion departure where he scratched for however long it was and picks the place he can go because of his no move clause. And the blowback from that, I think influenced Chris Drury at the deadline for not moving Vincent Trocheck. Probably rightly so, given that this summer he may be the only center with any value who could be available. So I give Drury credit for that. And I think Drury is starting to understand too that the kind of the human side of things, how you treat your people, is pretty important in this day and age in pro sports, and especially in hockey, because I think he maybe just assumed that the group before would accept whatever was happening with the players that were on their way out, and it didn't happen that way. So I think he maybe is working with a little bit of a gentler touch this year. You see bounce back season for Mika Zibanejad. Adam Fox has had a couple of injuries and certainly had the Olympic snub, but he's had a great season too. Vlad Gavrikov, a great first year on a long-term deal. Alexi Lafreniere's looked good in the back half of the season. And I think the best part of it for me these last couple of months is seeing not just a guy like Gabe Perreault as a first-round pick solidify himself as an NHLer, but guys you would never have thought, guys like Yaroslav Hamelosh, who's a mid-round pick and had been playing in the AHL a couple of years, Adam Sikora, second-round pick who's been playing in the AHL a couple of years, even a guy like Ty Cartier, scooped off waivers from Seattle, a team that never scores goals. This guy comes in and it looks like he's shot out of a cannon every single night. So
he's got wheels, yeah.
You've got young guys in these spots. You need hungry players in these bottom six, muck it up, stick their nose in roles, and you still got the skill guys like Zibanejad, like Laff, like Perreault. JT Miller looks healthier now and is really producing. Will Cooley's had a good back half of the year. So suddenly you're starting to see some light at the end of this tunnel where maybe they don't need to keep completely shaking it up this offseason. You can decide whether or not you want to trade Trocheck. Got a decision to make on Braden Schneider, who's an RFA. My personal feeling is you should probably move on from him and get another couple of pieces to shore up the defense behind that top pair. But there's been a lot of changes and a lot of uncertainty, I think, around these veterans. Guys saying if they can dump our captain and Trouba in such a rough way, and if they can dump Barclay Goodrow in such a rough way, will I be next? And that's very destabilizing. So now maybe you're seeing a little bit more stability. You're seeing a little bit more life in that room. And, going into next season, like I was saying, outside of Carolina, who does what they do every year in the Metro, does anybody in that Metro division really scare you going into next year? I don't think so. So I think there's room there. The Islanders did what they did. Jersey's in the process of doing what they're doing with their front office and possibly coaching staff, but they certainly have a great team. And I think the Rangers can be right there. When Igor Shesterkin is playing his best, there's nobody better. And they've got Adam Fox, and they've got a pretty ready-made top line of Perreault, Zibanejad, and Lafreniere that's been really good for a couple of months. And all these kind of hungry young guys in the mix for forward spots. They have to thread a needle and do some things this summer, but I feel like there's a path back to relevance for them pretty quickly. Definitely.
And I think, you probably need like a veteran center or something. Like Taylor Radish actually had a pretty decent year too, all told. But it's one of those, like, they're running up against it all the time, especially with those no movement clauses. So I understand why Drury tried to do what he did, but I definitely agree with you that there's a better way to go about it.
Yeah.
And I've been saying it's a miracle. I don't understand how he kept his job. Be perfectly honest with you. Well, you run people out like that. You rub people the wrong way.
Well, there's only one guy he answers to, and that guy tends to zig when everybody else zags. So Jim Dolan does what he does, and he still has a lot of faith in Chris Drury. Gave him an extension last summer, so he'll be here. But they do have the coach in place that Drury's always wanted, and I think Mike Sullivan. I think maybe people sort of dismissed the fact that he's here because they just didn't have a good season right from day one. But this guy he's an elite coach. He's one of those guys I put in that upper echelon of these other guys we were mentioning. So to have that situation of some stability, and again, you look at the other two local teams, Jersey's, what are they going to do? Islanders have changed their entire front office and now their coach in the last year. So sometimes that stability can help.
Completely. You don't win an Olympic gold medal by accident.
No.
So he's got to kind of have to know something.
Yeah.
That includes Drury too as an assistant GM. But to get you out of here on this one, we'll rinse out our mouths from the Ranger season. We'll get you out of here with a little Stanley Cup prediction. We're gonna have a new champ this year because the Florida Panthers are out. Injury bug. You want to talk about injury bug? That was amazing. But what's your Stanley Cup Finals matchup, and who takes it home?
Dallas was my pick at the beginning of the year. Actually, I think I had Dallas over the Devils as my preseason pick. And really, whatever it was, 17 games in, the Devils looked like a pretty good pick come out of the East. And then it all fell apart. So I'm going to stick with Dallas. I like what they do. I really like some of their pieces. If Miro Heiskanen is injured beyond the first round, the first few days of the playoffs, though, all bets are off. I love that guy. He's one of the quietest star defensemen in the league. So I'm not so sure that Jake Ottinger can carry them the way that he needs to, with missing a piece like Heiskanen. But the rest of their team, Wyatt Johnston's gonna, a star in this league, a 40-goal scorer. Jason Robertson, we already know about. So I like Dallas to go to the finals. I think they'll get through that gauntlet with Minnie and Colorado. And in the East, I hate to go back to a familiar team. Like we said, it's wide open, but I feel like the Lightning have got something going on this year. John Cooper should be in the running for the Jack Adams. It's funny when you don't win one, or you have a really talented team like he's had a lot of the time, you kind of get overlooked for those awards. And maybe, the Jack Adams winner usually gets fired within a couple of years, so maybe he doesn't want to win it. But the job that he's done, missing Eric Cernak for 20 plus games, Victor Hedman's missed half the season, Ryan McDonough's missed a ton of time. You just see them plug in these guys, and it's a credit to their development too, that they can get guys from the AHL and have them come up, guys who you've never heard. Like, you could be the most avid prospect watcher and you have no idea. Dominic James, Charles-Edouard Dastou, straight from France. Like, these are guys you would never ever know in a million years, and they come in and they're not just filling in spots, they're actually contributing. So I like the vibe that they've got going on, and really, with Sorokin and Shesterkin not in the playoffs, who would you take in a 7-game series in the East other than Andrei Vasilevsky at this point? I know he's got plenty of mileage on him, but he's certainly got that winning pedigree. He's not, it's not like he's in his late 30s either. He's still a pretty young guy. So I think that first round series is going to be a beast with Montreal. I love that Canadiens team. I just don't know if they have the D and the goaltending to compete with Tampa. Buffalo in the second round would be awesome. I don't know if Buffalo is even going to get by Boston because of Jeremy Swayman, but I think it's going to be Tampa. Carolina's always kind of the vogue pick, but they got to prove it to me that they can get through 3 rounds. It hasn't happened yet. They're probably happy the Rangers aren't anywhere near the playoffs since they see their kryptonite. But I'll say Tampa, Dallas, and I'm going to say Dallas hoist the cup.
That's a solid pick right there. That's definitely a solid pick. And sorry again to our friends up north. Another year that Canada does not hoist the Stanley Cup.
No, this is not. I mean, Montreal. I do like Ottawa against Carolina. I think the Sens could really pull that upset there, because they've got that's a really good team. As long as they get some decent goaltending from Linus Ullmark, I think they'll be right in there swinging with Carolina. But we were talking about Edmonton kind of taking a step back, and they're really the only Canadian team now out west, and Montreal maybe is the last Canadian hope. And like I said, Marty St. Louis, Jeff Gorton, Kent Hughes have really done a good job. That team is so much fun to watch. Cole Caulfield getting 50 goals, Nick Suzuki 100 points, Yuri Slavkovsky's had a great year. That's a line that you'd love to have being your number one line for the next 15 years, maybe. All three really good young guys, but I just don't know if they have the depth to get past Tampa and then try to get through the gauntlet of 2 more rounds.
Well, like we know, there's nothing like playoff hockey. And Arthur Staple, thank you for coming on. Appreciate you. So, Tri-State Hockey Pod, tell us where we can find it. When do you broadcast? And tell us all about it.
It's been a fun project. It's me, Johnny Lazarus, who covers the Rangers and is kind of everywhere and anywhere and everywhere on your social media. And Mike Rupp, Stanley Cup champion, former Ranger, all-around great guy. So we break down all 3 local teams.
Great.
Twice a week. Shows usually come out Mondays or Tuesdays and Fridays, and it's on the Daily Faceoff platform on YouTube and anywhere else you can find your podcasts. And this is our first year doing it, and we've successfully killed all 3 of the teams that we talk about. First time ever in NHL history since the Devils came into existence that all 3 New York area teams are missing the playoffs at the same time. So to say it's been a monumental first season of our podcast is probably an understatement.
It's only up from here, right?
That's right.
We're not saying you're the kiss of death. We're not going to say it.
Maybe we'll get some secret bribes from the 3 teams' owners to never do this again. But for now, it's been pretty fun.
Well, thank you for coming on, Arthur Staple. And if you want to join us on the in route, hit us up, faderoutemail@gmail.com. Slide in our DMs on IG at Fade Route Podcast. Drop us a line on X at Fade Route DNZ. And you could be the next member of the in crowd. Arthur Staple, thank you for joining us. And hopefully we will have you on again very soon.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
All right, stay on. Just let them
Solid.
upload it.
Goo.